When Grant ordered the stretcher toward the transport van, Tessa closed her fist around the torn amber ceiling tab, while Wade still wore the matching band. "Keep holding that piece of plastic," Boone said as he and 5 bikers stepped into the camera light, while 94 more emerged beyond the open gate. "Call the receiving facility on speaker," he added, and the entire lobby went silent. "Don't hurt him," Tessa cried as a metal tray struck the tile and spilled its contents beneath the stretcher, sending 3 stainless cups spinning toward the service doors, while Wade Danner's breath came fast and shallow above the rattle of loose wheels. It was 10:47 p.m. The emergency lights were flashing every 6 seconds, and Grant Sutter had both hands locked around the rear rail as 2 security officers forced the stretcher toward a white contract transport van displaying no receiving facility placard beyond the glass. The air tasted faintly of copper and old coffee, layered with the sharp sting of disinfectant and the oily exhaust drifting in from the loading bay. Tessa did not move. "Step aside," Grant said, keeping his voice low enough to sound reasonable on camera, though his knuckles had gone white around the rail and the stretcher was already pressing into Tessa's knees. Wade tried to lift his head, but the amber transfer band around his wrist caught the emergency light first, bright as a warning flare against his pale skin. Tessa had seen a different band on him less than an hour earlier, and she could still feel the torn ceiling tab pressing into her palm inside her coat pocket. Something had been changed. "He agreed to the transfer," Grant said, nodding toward the van, where the rear doors stood open and a folded thermal blanket lay beside an oxygen case with no facility label. Tessa studied Wade's mouth, waiting for him to confirm it, but all he managed was a dry whisper that sounded like one broken syllable. Above them, the hallway clock clicked from 10:47 to 10:48 while the backup generator gave a low, uneven shudder. Too late. One officer reached for Tessa's shoulder, and she twisted away, catching the stretcher rail with both arms as its wheels bumped over the metal threshold strip. Her only insulated coat slipped from Wade's legs and landed in a shallow ribbon of meltwater, absorbing the bitter smells of road salt, rubber, and gasoline. She pulled the soaked coat back over him, smoothing it across his shaking knees without releasing the rail. Wade needed it more. "You are trespassing," Grant said, speaking the word as though to erase the replaced wristband, the missing receiving facility placard, the medication haze in Wade's eyes, and the absence of a nurse. Tessa pressed her boots against the tile while the 2 officers tried to angle the stretcher around her. From outside came a sharp electrical snap, followed by the sudden wash of the loading bay security light. Tessa tightened her grip. At first, she saw only one broad figure beyond the van, a gray-bearded man in a rain-dark leather jacket, standing with both hands open at chest height. Another shape emerged behind him, then 5 more, then an entire line of scarred men walking uphill through freezing rain without engines, shouting, or raised fists. Their boots struck the wet pavement in a slow, measured rhythm as more black jackets appeared beneath the amber security lights. Grant stopped pushing. Tessa counted 12 men, then 30, then lost track when the darkness behind them unfolded into row after row of weathered faces, silver hair, scarred hands, and leather shining with rain. Nearly 100 bikers were visible from the loading bay, 6 beside the marked visitor line, and the rest forming dark rows beyond the open gate. Tessa stepped closer to Wade, uncertain whether they had come to rescue him, claim him, or settle something he had never told her. The gray-bearded man stopped several yards away, looked past Grant, and fixed his eyes on Tessa's clenched fist. "Keep holding that piece of plastic," he said. No one spoke. For hours earlier, Tessa had been kneeling behind a row of silver laundry carts, rubbing warmth into her fingers while the service corridor glowed with a soft white light reserved for people who paid more in 1 week than she had earned in 6 months. The polished walls reflected everything except her clearly. The frayed cuffs of her sweater, the salt stains on her boots, the yellow plastic badge she was no longer authorized to wear. Beyond the double doors, patients rested beneath heated blankets, while a ventilation system released air scented with eucalyptus and filtered so thoroughly that even the mountain cold seemed forbidden to enter. Tessa was not supposed to be there. 3 weeks earlier, Northcrest had ended her night cleaning contract after she asked why a patient named Leonard Pike vanished from the occupancy board between 1:12 and 1:26 a.m. His room had still been warm, his slippers remained beneath the bed, and no discharge team had crossed the lobby camera. The next morning, a supervisor called her unreliable, collected her uniform, and reminded her that temporary workers did not review patient movement. She had kept the old badge anyway. It opened nothing now. Since then, Tessa had slept in an abandoned maintenance shed 60 yards below the loading bay, where rusted garden tools hung above a narrow bench, and the roof leaked into 2 blue buckets whenever freezing rain struck from the east. She entered the institute only when the rear service door failed to seal, usually after midnight, taking discarded bread from covered kitchen trays and warming herself beside the laundry exhaust. Most employees looked through her. Wade did not. On his second evening at Northcrest, he had found her hiding behind the carts and placed a paper cup of coffee on the floor without asking her name, her story, or why her hand shook. The coffee had tasted burnt and sweet, with 2 packets of sugar settled at the bottom, but it was the first warm thing anyone had given her in 6 days. The next night, a wrapped turkey sandwich appeared beside the same wheel. Then an orange. Then clean socks. Wade never called it charity. He called it extra weight. At 7:18 that evening, the storm damaged a power line above the pass, and the heating system began cycling between lukewarm air and silence. Tessa slipped into Wade's room, carrying her insulated coat, the only possession she owned that still held heat after 10 minutes outdoors. He was awake, but unsteady, staring at the darkened window while the heart monitor marked each second with a soft green pulse. "You'll need this more than I will," she said, laying the coat across his legs. Wade gave her a tired look. "That sounds like poor planning." Tessa almost smiled. At 9:48 p.m., when Tessa returned to check Wade's room, Grant Sutter entered with a nurse she had never seen before. Grant asked Tessa to leave, then lowered his voice and checked Wade's wrist against the clipboard. Tessa retreated behind the half-closed door, but remained close enough to hear the snap of plastic. Through the narrow gap, she watched Grant cut away an amber transfer band, place it in his pocket, and fasten another around Wade's wrist while the unfamiliar nurse adjusted the medication line. The new band carried a darker seal. It also showed a different time. As the nurse locked the replacement band around Wade's wrist, its torn sealing tab caught on the supply cart wheel before dropping onto the spotless white floor. Tessa waited until their footsteps disappeared, then picked it up and slipped it into her coat pocket. The plastic smelled faintly of antiseptic and printer heat. At 10:03 p.m., a soft voice came through the corridor behind her. "Miss Rowan," Dr. Corinne Halwick said, standing beneath a recessed light in a cream suit untouched by rain or dust. "You and I should discuss your future." At 10:13 p.m., Tessa sat across from a glass desk while the storm pressed icy fingers against the windows. Corinne placed 3 objects in a perfect line between them: a blue shelter access card, a sealed relocation envelope, and a formal employment contract bearing Tessa's full name. Corinne folded her hands behind the 3 objects as if she were presenting a choice rather than purchasing silence. The blue access card rested on a square of white linen. The employment contract had already been marked with yellow tabs, and the envelope carried no writing at all. Outside the glass wall, freezing rain dragged silver lines across the darkness, while warm air moved quietly through vents hidden beneath the polished floor. Everything had been prepared. "The access card opens a private room at Haven Bridge," Corinne said. 3 months, meals included, and transportation down the mountain in the morning. She touched the contract next, explaining that Northcrest needed reliable night staff, and that Tessa could begin at $18.75 an hour once the weather cleared. The envelope remained between them, thick enough to hold more cash than Tessa had seen since losing her apartment. Tessa stared at it. The office smelled of white tea, furniture wax, and the faint citrus perfume Corinne wore, scents chosen to erase any suggestion that desperate decisions were made there. Behind Corinne, a wall display showed mountain photographs in brushed silver frames, each one depicting the past beneath perfect summer light. There were no images of black ice, failed heaters, or people sleeping in maintenance sheds. Only beauty. What do you need me to say? Tessa asked. Corinne's expression did not change. She slid a single-page statement across the desk and placed a black fountain pen beside it, aligning both with the edge so precisely that the gesture felt colder than the storm. The statement said Wade had requested a voluntary transfer, appeared calm, and entered the transport area without resistance. It also said Tessa had observed no alteration to his identification band. A lie in 4 sentences. Tessa read the page twice, then looked through the glass toward the corridor. Nurses in pale uniforms moved between pools of soft light, their shoes silent on cream-colored flooring, while somewhere beyond the reinforced windows the temperature had fallen to 23 degrees Fahrenheit. Her shed had no heater, one cracked blanket, and a roof leak directly above the bench where she slept. The access card could change that. Mr. Danner is confused, Corinne said. Patients sometimes misunderstand necessary decisions, especially after medication. Tessa rubbed the edge of the torn amber seal through her pocket. Where are you sending him? Corinne adjusted one cuff. To a facility equipped for his current needs. What facility? Tessa asked again. The silence lasted 3 seconds. Corinne finally named Pine Hollow Transitional Care, a place Tessa had heard mentioned by kitchen staff but never seen on any transport schedule. She pushed the contract closer and reminded Tessa that survival did not require heroism, only cooperation. Tessa reached for the blue access card. Her fingers closed around the warm plastic, small enough to disappear in her palm, yet powerful enough to promise a locked door and clean sheets. Then she noticed the transfer sheet partly hidden beneath the statement. A printed time showed 7:41 p.m. beside it. The physician approval line carried a digital signature entered at 8:16. 35 minutes later, Tessa set the access card down. How was the transfer approved before the doctor approved it? Corinne's face remained composed, but one hand moved over the exposed corner of the document. Tessa pulled the page toward herself before it disappeared. The receiving code, printed beneath Pine Hollow, did not match the name, and the vehicle authorization box contained only 3 initials, with no transport provider number or dispatcher confirmation. Corinne rose. You are reading records you have no right to see. Then tell me why they do not match. The soft lights flickered once, turning the white office gray, and the storm pressed hard enough against the windows to make the glass hum. Corinne gathered the papers into a leather folder. But Tessa had already memorized the 2 times and the 6-character receiving code. She had always remembered numbers. Take the offer, Corinne said, her voice quieter now. By midnight, this opportunity will no longer exist. Tessa looked at the access card, the envelope, and the contract with her name printed in clean black letters. For one breath, she imagined waking in a heated room. Then she pushed all 3 objects back across the glass desk. Then you can explain the transfer without my signature. A movement beyond the office caught her eye. Grant and 2 security officers were rolling Wade past the reception wall on a stretcher, his pale hand hanging beneath the rail and the new amber band flashing under the emergency lights. Tessa ran. Tessa reached the reception corridor as Grant pushed the stretcher through the automatic doors, their white panels sliding apart with a soft mechanical whisper that felt absurdly polite. The lobby beyond them was all pale stone, frosted glass, and recessed lighting, a place designed to make every decision look clean. Wade's bare hand swung below the rail. Stop, Tessa called, but Grant kept moving, and the 2 security officers tightened their grip as if speed alone could turn the transfer into something official. The digital clock above reception read 10:34 p.m. A bowl of green apples sat untouched beneath it, polished so brightly they reflected the emergency lights, while Wade's face looked gray against the white pillow. The contrast made Tessa feel ill. She caught the stretcher near the elevators and placed both hands on the side rail. He did not agree to this. Grant stopped with visible effort, then looked at her old badge, her wet boots, and the tear in her sleeve. You are not employed here, he said. You have no authority, no access, and no reason to be near a patient. Tessa pulled the torn amber tab from her pocket. Then why did you replace his band? For the first time, Grant's gaze dropped. Only for a second. It was enough. The tab was no larger than a thumbnail, translucent under the sterile lighting, with a darkened strip where the tamper seal had changed color. Tessa held it between two fingers while the lobby ventilation pushed warm, eucalyptus-scented air across her face. Behind the glass entrance, freezing rain hammered the pavement hard enough to bounce. Inside, nothing was supposed to look uncontrolled. That came from discarded material, Grant said. Give it to me. Tessa closed her hand. No, one of the officers stepped forward, but Grant raised a palm. Careful now, because 3 ceiling cameras cover the lobby from different angles. He lowered his voice and told Tessa that Wade was being moved for specialized observation. He said delays could be dangerous, that she was interfering with medical care, and that Corinne had already offered her more help than most people would receive. Each sentence sounded measured. Each one pushed harder. Wade moved his head against the pillow and tried to lift one hand toward the phone resting beside his hip. The motion was weak, but deliberate. Tessa leaned closer. What is it? His lips formed 2 broken words she could not understand. Grant reached for the phone first. Tessa blocked his hand and saw the screen glow with a patient portal still open beneath a dim battery warning. A confirmation number filled the top line, followed by her own name, Tessa Rowan. She remembered sitting beside Wade earlier while he asked her to enter her birth date and contact information. He had called it a temporary form. She had believed him. The screen went black before she could read the rest. His medication is affecting his judgment, Grant said, taking the phone and slipping it into a plastic belongings pouch. You are making this harder for him. Tessa looked at Wade's wrist. The new amber band showed a printed transfer time of 7:41 p.m., the same time she had seen in Corinne's office, but the darker tamper line ran unevenly around the seal. Someone had removed the original band and replaced it with this one. She moved to the front of the stretcher. Where is the nurse assigned to this transfer? Grant did not answer. Where is the receiving paperwork? Silence. Why is there no facility name on the transport team? The officers exchanged a glance. Grant's face hardened. He told them to continue. The stretcher rolled forward, and Tessa walked backward in front of it, forcing them to slow as the flawless lobby narrowed into the colder service passage. White stone gave way to gray tile, framed artwork to exposed pipes, warm eucalyptus to bleach, damp concrete, and distant vehicle exhaust. The Institute's polished face ended there. So did Grant's patience. He ordered one officer to remove her from the path. The man reached for her arm, and Tessa twisted away, striking a metal supply cart with her hip. 3 folded blankets slid to the floor. Tessa's insulated coat followed, slipping from Wade's legs into a strip of meltwater beneath the loading door. Tessa dropped to one knee, grabbed the coat, and spread it back over him despite the water soaking through her sleeves. Grant pushed the stretcher past her. She rose and ran after it. Ahead, the outer doors opened to black wind, orange security light, and a contract transport van waiting with its rear doors wide. The cold entered all at once. Tessa stepped between the stretcher and the threshold, clenched the torn seal in one hand, and planted both boots against the metal strip. You are not taking him anywhere until he can speak for himself, she said. Grant gave the officers a final nod. Behind her, the van engine idled. Beyond it, somewhere down the mountain road, 100 motorcycles had already gone silent. The first biker stopped at the edge of the loading zone, where a yellow line separated the spotless medical entrance from pavement streaked with black slush, road salt, and oil. He was broad-shouldered, gray-bearded, and scarred across one eyebrow, but both of his hands remained open and visible as freezing rain ran from his leather sleeves. Behind him, more men emerged in measured rows, their boots carrying mud onto the white spill of security light, while the Institute's glass walls reflected them as a single dark shape. No one spoke. Tessa tightened her grip on the stretcher rail. She had expected shouting, engines, perhaps men pushing past Grant to seize Wade, but the motorcycles remained somewhere below the bend, their silence more unsettling than thunder. They had ridden only as far as the salted lower turnout before ice began forming on the upper road, then walked the final quarter mile through sleet so the medical access lane remained clear. Grant noticed that too. "This is private property," he called, raising his voice toward the gray-bearded man. "Leave immediately." The man glanced at the painted line beneath his boots and stepped backward half a pace, making certain he remained outside it. 5 bikers remained beside Boone in the marked visitor area, while the other 94 formed visible rows beyond the open gate on the county turnout. The movement was so exact that the only sound came from rain striking leather and the transport van's engine idling in a low, steady hum. Control changed shape. Tessa moved closer to Wade's shoulder, uncertain which side of the stretcher offered safety. She had heard stories about road clubs, debts carried for decades, and men who settled private matters far from witnesses. Wade had never explained the faded insignia tattooed near his collarbone or why 3 different people had called him Harbert during his first week at North Crest. Maybe these men were not here to help him. Maybe Grant was not the only person trying to take him away. The gray-bearded biker looked directly at Tessa. "Boone Carver," he said. "People call me Latch." He did not offer his hand. "We came because Wade missed a check-in at 9. Most of the riders had already gathered at a winter benefit 12 miles below the pass, and Boone opened Wade's portal alert only after the missed call. Grant gave a short laugh and pointed toward the road. "You came with 100 men because a patient missed a phone call." Boone turned his head slightly, counting the security cameras above the service doors. "We came on foot because your road is icing over. We stopped our bikes below the gate because we were asked not to obstruct medical access. 6 of us are standing in your marked visitor area. The others are on the county turnout beyond your gate, and your entire access lane remains clear." 3 facts, then silence. Grant's authority depended on disorder, but Boone gave him none. Corinne appeared behind the inner glass doors in her cream suit, untouched by wind, framed by warm amber lighting and a wall of white stone. Outside stood 100 men in soaked black leather, their scars and gray hair exposed beneath freezing rain. The spotless institute reflected the mud on their boots, but the men in the storm were the only ones respecting every boundary. "Mr. Carver," Corinne said through the intercom, "Mr. Danner is receiving appropriate care. Your presence is alarming our patients." Boone looked at the dark upper windows. "Then keep us outside." He faced Tessa again. "Is he awake?" She glanced at Wade. His eyes were partly open, but his breathing remained heavy and his lips barely moved. "Not enough." "Did he agree to leave?" "He cannot even finish a sentence." Boone absorbed that without changing expression. Grant stepped forward and accused Tessa of interfering with a lawful transfer. Boone did not argue with him. He watched Tessa's closed fist instead. Meltwater ran from her sleeve, down her wrist, and over the amber edge visible between her fingers. "What are you holding?" he asked. Tessa hesitated. The bikers behind him looked rough enough to frighten anyone crossing a quiet road at night. Yet none had crossed the yellow line, touched the van, or raised a phone toward her face. Grant had done all the talking. Boone had only asked. She opened her hand. The torn tamper tab gleamed beneath the loading light, small and translucent against her red skin. Boone's eyes narrowed. "Keep holding that piece of plastic." Grant ordered her to surrender it as institute property. Tessa closed her fist again. Boone nodded once, then reached slowly into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a clear waterproof folder. He held it where the nearest camera could see, careful not to cross the line. Inside was a printed confirmation page bearing a timestamp, Wade Danner's patient identification number, and a name Tessa recognized before Boone read aloud. "Hers. According to the record Wade sent us at 7:32, Boone said, Tessa Rowan is not an intruder." Curran's hand froze against the intercom button. Boone lifted the page higher. "She is his documented patient advocate and required transfer contact until 8 tomorrow morning." Curran stepped through the inner doors at 10:51 p.m., carrying the same leather folder she had closed in her office, while warm lobby light poured around her and turned the freezing rain beyond the glass into a silver curtain. Boone remained outside the yellow line, His waterproof folder raised with a loading bay camera could record every page. Tessa stood between them with Wade's stretcher at her back, one hand gripping the torn amber seal and the other holding her soaked coat across his knees. Corinne and Grant remained beneath the warm interior lights, yet neither of them looked toward the camera. "That document is not valid," Corinne said. She spoke through the open doorway now, rejecting the intercom because its speaker distorted her voice and made controls sound uncertain. Mr. Danner was medicated, confused, and incapable of naming a patient advocate or authorizing the release of transfer information. Boone turned the confirmation page, so the printed time faced the nearest camera. 7:32. Corinne's eyes moved toward Grant. The second amber band had been issued at 7:41. The physician approval appeared at 8:16, and the additional medication order had been entered at 8:24, long before the pump recorded the dose at 9:56. 3 times. One sequence. Tessa felt the shape of it before anyone explained it. Wade had completed the form 9 minutes before the transfer band was printed, 52 minutes before the medication order was entered, and more than 2 hours before the dose reached him. Boone opened the folder to his second page. The portal showed that the evening social worker had verified Wade's capacity at 7:29, 3 minutes before he signed the advocate authorization and released the transfer information to Tessa, he said. It also sent a copy to Tessa and to Wade's 2 listed emergency contacts. Tessa looked at the dead phone inside Grant's belongings pouch. She remembered Wade asking her to type her birth date, then telling her to press the blue button twice. She had assumed he was adding a contact. He had been building a door they could not close quietly. Corinne said the authorization was temporary and limited. Boone agreed. Until 8 tomorrow morning. His lack of argument took the air from her objection. Tessa stepped closer to Wade and formally requested the destination as his documented patient advocate. The title felt too large for her worn clothes and shaking hands, yet the words changed the loading bay. Grant could dismiss a trespasser. He could not lawfully conceal a disputed transfer from Wade's documented advocate and authorize contact while the cameras recorded him. Corinne answered that Wade would be taken to Pine Hollow Transitional Care. Tessa lifted his wrist toward the light. The amber band displayed the receiving code PH, 417C, beneath a row of black bars. "Then say the code," she said. Corinne looked at the band, but did not read it aloud. Grant moved to lower Wade's arm, and Boone raised one finger without crossing the line. The 5 bikers beside Boone remained still, their soaked jackets absorbing the orange security light while the Institute's white walls threw back every movement. Grant stopped before touching her. Boone called to a thin man standing in the second row, an older biker with clear glasses and a waterproof tablet held under his jacket. The man typed the 6-character code into a public licensing directory and waited while the weak cellular signal loaded one line at a time. Rain rattled against the van roof. Inside the lobby, the artificial eucalyptus scent drifted toward the loading bay and mixed with wet leather, exhaust, and the sharp chemical odor of melting road salt. The screen finally brightened. The biker read the result without drama. PH 417C belonged to Pine Hollow's East Intake Wing. The state directory listed its overnight intake authorization as suspended, and a public closure notice dated November 3rd confirmed that the East Wing was not accepting patients. The date was February 19th. Tessa looked at the open van, its blank doors, unlabeled oxygen case, and folded blanket. Where was this vehicle actually taking him? Grant said the directory was outdated. Boone asked him to provide a current receiving confirmation. Grant reached for his radio, spoke quietly, then waited. No response came. Corinne claimed the storm had disrupted communication, but Tessa pointed toward the printed band. "You had enough communication to issue this." Wade's fingers moved beneath the wet coat, searching until they found a wrist. His grip was weak, but intentional. Tessa bent close, and this time his voice formed one complete word. "Stay." She straightened before Corinne could call it confusion. "I am staying," she said. Boone lowered the confirmation pages, but did not put them away. "So are we." Behind Boone, the riders shifted sideways without moving toward the building, leaving a perfectly clear lane from the van to the mountain road. The exit was unobstructed. The evidence was not. At 10:58 p.m., Corinne ordered Grant to clear the loading area, document every face, and report the gathering as an organized attempt to intimidate a medical facility. Grant repeated the order into his radio, louder than necessary, then pointed toward the 6 bikers near the visitor line and a larger formation beyond the gate. No one moved. Boone looked up at the 3 cameras above the loading doors, studied the dark windows along the east wing, and raised one hand. 2 steps back, he said. Every biker obeyed at once. Their boots scraped across wet pavement, widening the empty lane between the van and the mountain road until even a second vehicle could have passed without slowing. Men with scarred faces and rain-black leather arranged themselves beneath the security lights, while the polished glass behind Tessa reflected them as orderly rows. The cameras showed a simple contradiction. The Institute spoke of procedure, while the soaked men outside were the ones following it. "Phones out," Boone said. Across the visitor area and the county turnout, phones appeared one by one, each angled toward the van, the boundary line, and the visible clock rather than Wade's face. "Show the time. Record only what is public. No names unless they're spoken aloud. No one crosses the line." Grant stared at the formation, then at the clear road. He had expected resistance he could label. Boone gave him compliance he could not distort. Corinne stepped closer to the doorway and warned that filming patients violated privacy. Boone turned his own phone downward so the camera showed only the painted line, the van's blank rear doors, and the digital time. 10 hours, 59 minutes, and 14 seconds. The other bikers followed, angling their devices away from Wade's face. 3 facts. 1 silence. Tessa felt the cold moving through her wet sleeves, but she kept the coat wrapped around Wade's legs and the torn seal locked inside her fist. The loading bay's heated air reached only a few feet beyond the threshold, creating a narrow border where steam lifted from soaked leather and melted ice ran beneath expensive glass. Wade lay exactly between those worlds, his stretcher half inside the clean corridor and half exposed to mountain wind. Grant ordered the officers to wheel him back from the doorway, not toward his room, but farther inside where the cameras would lose the van. Tessa blocked the front rail. Boone did not step forward. Instead, he asked which camera covered the service passage. Corinne said security placement was confidential. Boone nodded toward a black dome above the interior doors. "That one stopped turning 11 minutes ago." Grant glanced up before he could stop himself. Several bikers noted the time. Corinne accused them of manufacturing suspicion. Boone answered with no accusation at all. "Preserve the footage." The words landed harder than a threat because they assumed someone else would review it. He removed a single-page notice from the waterproof folder and held it flat beneath the loading light. It requested retention of camera recordings, medication logs, badge access records, transfer authorizations, vehicle identification, and every revision attached to Wade's chart from 7 p.m. onward. Boone did not call it evidence of wrongdoing. He called it material relevant to a disputed transfer. Careful language. Heavy pressure. Corinne refused to accept the page. Boone photographed the notice beneath the visible clock, then emailed identical copies to the board chair, the insurer, and the inspection office before placing the paper inside a transparent sleeve at the boundary. "Electronic delivery recorded at 11:01, he said, turning the sent message timestamps toward the nearest camera. Grant reached toward it. Then he noticed several nearby phones recording the document, while dozens more captured the unobstructed lane and the visible clock from beyond the gate. His hand stopped. Wind swept through the loading bay, lifting the edge of Tessa's soaked coat and sending a wave of cold across Wade's exposed shoulder. Without instruction, the first row of bikers shifted sideways. The second row followed. The 6 men nearest the visitor line shifted into a shallow curve that softened the wind around the stretcher, while the rows beyond the gate remained still and kept the road completely open. They became a wall without trapping anyone. Tessa's shivering eased. Corinne watched the formation through glass designed to make vulnerable people feel observed, and for the first time, observation worked against her. "This is coercion," she said. Boone shook his head. "Your vehicle can leave. Your staff can walk away. We have touched nothing." He looked toward the amber band around Wade's wrist. "We are only making sure no one later says this happened unseen." Corinne turned to Grant. "Continue the transfer." Grant placed one hand on the stretcher rail, but did not push. Before him stood Tessa, visibly cold, legally designated, and holding the broken seal. Behind her lay Wade, medicated but conscious. Beyond the doors waited 100 silent witnesses, each obeying the boundary more carefully than North Crest had obeyed its own records. Boone lifted his phone. "Call Pine Hollow," he said. "Use the speaker." Grant took the Institute phone from the wall cradle at 11:04 p.m., entered the number listed beside Pine Hollow's receiving code, and switched on the speaker while the white loading corridor held its breath. The first ring sounded bright and ordinary. The second echoed through the glass entryway. The third faded into the freezing rain outside, where 100 bikers stood motionless beneath orange security lights with water streaming from their scarred faces and black leather jackets. No one answered. Corinne said the storm had interrupted overnight staffing and ordered Grant to end the call, but Boone asked him to let it continue until the automated system identified the facility. 7 rings passed. Then a recorded voice announced that Pine Hollow's East intake wing was closed and that no patient arrivals could be accepted through that number. The line disconnected. Silence returned. Tessa lifted Wade's wrist beneath the light, placing the amber band beside the torn ceiling tab in her palm. The two pieces matched along one jagged edge, but the activated tamper strip and the matching torn tab showed that the replacement band had been fastened inside North Crest that night. Boone set Wade's authorization page on the dry side of the threshold, then arranged 3 printed records beneath it: the 732 advocate authorization, the 741 transfer band issue time, and the 816 physician approval. The papers occupied less than 2 feet of white tile, yet no one could move the stretcher without answering what they showed. "Mr. Sutter," Boone said, "which came first, approval or transport preparation?" Grant stared at the times. "Administrative systems do not always update in sequence." "Then preserve the audit history," Boone replied. He offered no accusation. Corinne stepped forward and said internal records were confidential, but Tessa answered before Boone could. "I am his documented patient advocate and required transfer contact until 8. Her voice trembled from cold, not uncertainty. "I am requesting the receiving confirmation, the authorized transfer time, the transport provider's name, and the record showing when I was notified." The man seated behind the wheel of the contract transport van looked toward Grant. He wore no North Crest badge, no Pine Hollow identification, and no visible company patch. Grant did not name him. 3 missing answers. 1 open door. Corinne's cream suit remained perfect beneath the warm lights, yet the hand holding her leather folder had begun to tighten. The polished Institute still looked orderly, but every visible record now belonged to the people standing outside it. Boone raised the preservation notice and spoke quietly enough that everyone leaned closer. He explained that copies of the authorization, timestamps, public licensing result, and current video would be delivered to the board's morning review, the insurer responsible for Wade's care, and the independent inspection team scheduled for 7 a.m. If the stretcher entered the van, 100 witnesses would record the exact minute. If any file changed before morning, the saved copies would show the difference. Nothing in his voice suggested force. Nothing needed to. Corinne turned toward Grant. "Proceed." Grant placed both hands on the rear rail. Tessa braced herself at the front, the soak coat wrapped around Wade and the broken seal pressed into her palm. The security officers waited for Grant to push. He looked at the camera above the doorway, the phones beyond the yellow line, the contract van with no receiving facility placard, the disconnected call display, and the printed sequence lying on the floor. Then he removed his hands. Corinne said his name once. Grant did not answer. Wade's eyes opened farther, and his fingers closed weakly around Tessa's sleeve. Boone remained outside the boundary, giving Corinne every physical path she needed and no hidden path at all. The van could leave. The stretcher could move. The 100 bikers would not touch either one. They would only remember. At 11:08 p.m., Corinne looked through the glass at the silent rows of men, then down at the amber band whose false certainty had collapsed under the documented sequence and Pine Hollow's recorded closure announcement. Her authority had not been challenged by noise, fists, or engines. It had been placed beneath a light and asked to explain itself. For 11 seconds, no one moved. Then Corinne closed the leather folder. "Return Mr. Danner to his room," she said. The officers released the rails. Grant turned the stretcher toward the corridor, and the white doors opened behind them. As Wade crossed back into the warmth, his hand found Tessa's wrist and held on. At 6:42 a.m., the first inspection vehicle passed rows of motorcycles left safely in the salted lower turnout, where support vans had been rotating the riders back to the benefit hall, and stopped at the gate. Boone maintained a rotating six-person witness team at the boundary through the night as the remaining riders sheltered in shifts at the benefit hall below the pass. Inside, Tessa remained beside Wade while the medication slowly cleared from his system. By sunrise, the Institute's own records had become the trap Corinne could no longer escape. The independent reviewers received the 732 advocate authorization, the 741 transfer band record, the 816 physician approval, Pine Hollow's recorded closure announcement, the vehicle photographs, and multiple time-stamped recordings showing the unobstructed lane, the transport van, and the exact minute the stretcher reached the loading door. The same audit search reopened Leonard Pike's earlier transfer and revealed a matching receiving code discrepancy, proving that Tessa's first question had never been unreasonable. Boone added nothing dramatic. He held the torn amber tab beside the matching edge of the band still secured around Wade's wrist and asked the review chair to compare them. They matched. Corinne tried to describe the transfer as an emergency decision made during a communications failure, but the reviewers found that Wade's chart had been edited twice after Tessa refused the shelter access card. Grant was asked whether he had verified the receiving facility, the driver, or Wade's consent. He answered no 3 times. That was the final move. The bikers had not blocked the van, entered the building, or threatened anyone. They had removed every excuse Corinne might have used and left her alone with her own timestamps. Before noon, her authority was suspended pending formal review. Grant's access badge was deactivated, and the contract transport van left the mountain empty. Wade remained under observation until he could speak clearly and choose his next facility for himself. When he was finally sitting upright, he looked at the soaked coat folded beside Tessa and said, "You stayed." Tessa glanced through the glass toward Boone and the remaining bikers, their leather jackets drying in the weak morning sun. So did they. 3 months later, Tessa returned to North Crest through the front entrance rather than the service corridor. The solid frosted doors had been replaced with safety doors containing clear upper observation panels and privacy film at stretcher height. The loading bay camera had been repositioned to eliminate its blind corner, and every overnight transfer now required a verified receiving confirmation and a second staff sign-off, while any listed advocate had to be notified before the exterior doors opened. Tessa worked at the new patient rights desk on a night shift, wearing a blue identification badge with her photograph and full name. With Wade's written consent, compliance gave Tessa a de-identified replica of the amber band and a certified photograph of the torn seal, while the originals remained preserved with the case records. She kept the replica, the photograph, and a small square cut from a ruined coat inside a locked drawer. Boone had left one additional object before the bikers rode away: a plain brass key stamped with 2 words, "Stay visible." It did not open a motorcycle, a clubhouse, or a hidden box. It opened a small furnished apartment above a repair shop owned collectively by the riders, offered without conditions until Tessa could support herself. She had used it for 6 weeks, then returned it to Boone. He refused to take it back. "Keep it for the next person standing outside," he said. Tessa mounted the key inside a small clear display case above the locked drawer that held the replica band and the certified photograph. Every night, the key caught the corridor light before anything else on her desk. The band remained proof of what someone had tried to hide. The key became proof that Tessa was no longer invisible, and that one quiet plea in the darkness had been answered by 100 men who had never crossed the line, yet had changed everything on the other side of it. If you believe in the true brotherhood and kindness of bikers, please hit the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe to our channel for more stories. This story is a fictional narrative created for entertainment, reflection, and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental.